Good morning, baseball fans, and welcome back to Dan's Vintage Baseball PC. Do not be fooled by that fancy name. It's just me and some friends talking about baseball cards. These guys. Anyway, so this is a show that I've been sort of considering and thinking about doing and asking this particular guest for quite a long time. And then, as luck would have it, he reached out to me and said, "Hey, why don't we collaborate?" So I'm like, "Yeah, let's do that." So, anyway, my guest today is Leighton Sheldon. If you're a viewer of this channel, you know Leighton because you've seen him on a bunch of my videos, the Philly Show video, the Strongsville video, the video with the National. If you're a collector and you're in the hobby, you know Leighton as one of the number one, I guess, dealers of vintage cards in the entire hobby. So much so that he's been in the news from it, has gotten a couple of collections that were fascinating and awesome. And I'm really happy to have him on the show today. So let's bring him in. Good morning, Dan. Sir. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
So thanks for coming on. I mean, my little channel is getting, getting some big guests these days. I'm feeling pretty good about that. So really,
you know why, Daniel? It's because you enjoy it.
Yeah, that's one of the things about the YouTube experience is that it's just been so much fun, just meeting people and seeing, not even just guests that I've had on, but getting people at shows coming up and saying, "Hey, I watch your channel." It's fun, and then you can talk to them. And my favorite is the woman at the National who said she and her husband came up. The husband came up and introduced himself, and she points to me and says, "I know you. Your face is on my living room TV." I said, "Sorry."
Yeah.
Anyway, so I generally ask all the guests what your basic background is. I know all this because I've watched you on many different channels and stuff. So, but just the short story of you starting out collecting and then getting into the hobby and then getting into the business of the hobby.
Sure. And, beyond watching me, Daniel, we've kind of become friends over the last several years. So I feel we kind of know each other pretty well, but I'll try to be succinct. So I started off, I'm sure, like many of the folks who are watching your channel, Daniel, I originally wasn't a baseball card fan. I was originally a baseball fan. I grew up as a young kid, a young pup. Not only did I love the sport of baseball, but I believed, probably like many of you out there, I was going to play Major League Baseball one day. And so I don't need to take you through the trials and tribulations of my childhood, but I'm sure you can imagine as I'm sitting here with Daniel, I did make the Yankees. They didn't need a second baseman alongside Jeter. They had it taken care of. Although I still think the Jets could use me a quarterback, even with Rodgers starting this Monday. I do believe that, the last several years for them have been tough. And I still have a good arm. But anyway, I digress. So I took that love of baseball. And I don't remember exactly how old I was, Daniel, but I started to buy packs of cards like many of us did, growing up. And it was really just a wonderful experience in that they were pretty reasonably priced, which is obviously a complete contrast to today. Forget about the gum. I just had so much enjoyment out of sorting my cards, looking through them. And remember, not to date us, but this is the days of, those were the days of pre-internet, kind of pre-eBay, pre-everything. So I enjoyed looking at the back of the stats of the cards. And then, oh my goodness, my world was blown up when I went to some local conventions and I saw old cards. But remember, an old card to me was like a 1973 Topps card. So thanks for laughing.
I think you're calling me old because I collected those.
So I try to keep.
No offense taken.
Yeah. So anyway, my journey kind of started there, and then as a young teenager, I still collected, but then I remember splitting a table with two buddies named Mark Piron and Kenny Reed, probably when I was 13. The whole table of 8 feet was $35. So my share was $12, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but I'm fairly certain that I did more than $12. So much so that I came home and I told my parents, I'm like, this is awesome. When's the next convention? But remember, they got to drive me. They got to pick me up. I'm using like weird things from the house to exhibit at the convention. My mom's like, where's my purple shelving unit? I'm like, oh, it's part of my show stuff now. She's like, what are you talking about? Give it back to me. So anyway, I kind of took that, and I'm the oldest of 4 in my family. And so I went to high school. I graduated Manalapan High School, and then I decided to go to college. I went to Rutgers College. And while I was at Rutgers, I graduated there in 2000. But while I was at Rutgers, I had a number of jobs, meaning freshman year. I was always very industrious. I didn't know what I wanted to do, meaning I definitely knew I wanted to play for the Yankees, but I figured that was kind of closing. And as far as, the Jets, well, we just went over that. They didn't call. And so when I was in school, for example, freshman year, I worked for Smith Barney and Dean Witter. I don't even know those companies exist anymore. But, I learned about the stock market. I learned about cold calling and talking to people. And, of course, meanwhile, I was still collecting cards and started to buy and sell just a little bit more. Then I worked at Johnson & Johnson in college as a financial analyst. And that job was really important to me, Daniel, because that paid me decently. And so for the first time, I had excess funds besides just paying for my own education as I went. And so I don't know about how it was for you when you were growing up, Daniel, but for me, if I sold a card for $1 that I paid a quarter for, my dad's a CPA. I remember bragging to him, like, oh my God, I just did 400% on my money. He's like, yeah, but what are you going to do with 75 cents profit? And I'm like, what do you mean? Why are you raining on my parade, guy? And meanwhile, this is my dad. And so my point is, I really understood at that point, like, oh, even though I was making a healthy percentage, the absolute dollars I was making really wasn't bupkis. I wasn't able to pay any bills. And so the reason why I tell the story like this, because I remember getting some sort of paycheck from Johnson & Johnson. And I remember buying like $1,000 plus deal, collection, whatever the case is.
Mm-hmm.
And I just flipped it. So in other words, I paid $1,000, maybe I sold it for $1,300. And so even though I only made 30%, I had $300.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the start of it for me as far as just being in college. And then when I graduated school in 2000, I'm sure like many of us, we wanted to get a regular job and get paid and move out of my parents' house. And so I did do all of that with the exception of one key piece. I didn't get a regular job. I decided to kind of take a shot and work. Remember at that time, 24 years ago, Daniel, there was no alt. Even if eBay was around, you really couldn't work for eBay. Auction houses were like, you could count on one hand how many there were. There was no jobs there. And so I was fortunate. I connected with a gentleman by the name of Mark Murphy, the baseball card kid. And he literally paid me the same amount of money, which at the time was Anderson Consulting. Today it's Accenture, I believe. And so they made me an offer out of school. I think it was like $1,000 a week, plus it was $2,500 for suits. And I said, well, I don't really wear suits. I don't really need $2,500. But Daniel, they weren't asking. They were telling me you were taking this money to wear a suit. And so I just decided, you know what? Even if it doesn't work out for me, I could just take my degree, which, I paid a lot of money for, and I'll go get a corporate job if necessary. And so fast forward, right? I worked for Mark Murphy for 2 years. I then went to go work for Leland's for Josh Evans, may he rest in peace, and Hef. I was referred to them by my really good buddy, Rich Albersheim of Albersheim's Autographs. And I stayed there for about 4 years. And then I left there, give or take 20 years ago. I started Just Collect. You can find me at justcollect.com. We have a great blog where you can read about all the collections that we buy and sell.
Just Collect.
And I'd say about 7-ish years ago or so, I started a company called VintageBreaks.com just because I really do love vintage, as you can tell. And there was really no one doing what we are now doing. And there's some others that have joined us, which was taking really super duper old packs of cards, which I was a fan of, but still to this day can't afford to open a 62 top cell on my own, but thought it'd be really cool if we divided it up and we kind of came together as a community. And my first inkling of that, Daniel, I don't know if I ever told you this story, but as far as thinking Vintage Breaks could work, so before I ever did anything like that, for a couple of years in a row at the National, as a little like treat to myself, as I started to have a few more dollars, I would buy a vintage pack and I would open it just to hope to get some high grade cards. Daniel, there were some Nationals where I had 20, 30 people at my booth just watching. Remember, this is the days of no YouTube, no one was putting these streams online. And so when I went for it, I just kind of took a shot, but I had a love for it. And that's the common theme for me, is trying to do something that I was passionate about and thankfully still am. And my son, who has his headphones on in the background, I could only hope at 9 years old, as he gets older, he finds something, whether it be it's fishing, baseball cards, or anything in between, that he's just as passionate about as you and I are, Daniel, about baseball cards.
Well, I
So
mean,
I hope
that's
I did a
kind of
good job of being succinct.
that's kind of the dream, really. Is your job something that you love? I mean, that's, to me, that's the good life. Because the drudgery of a job that you don't like, that takes a lot out of you. If you can live your dream, I mean, to me, I do this as a hobby. It's my fun. But my fun is your career. So, kudos to you. So, one of the fascinating things that I find about your particular place in the hobby now is the way that you acquire these large collections. And the stories behind them are so good that they're their own videos, their own blogs, or whatever. But what are, like, some of the earlier kind of collection purchase stories that really kind of set you on the path that you're on now?
Sure. One that comes to mind in particular is the fairy godmother find. And I don't know if you remember that or had read it on our blog, Daniel, but in a nutshell, what it was is a woman who is no longer with us. She befriended what I would say was like a local Boston family. And you might ask why? Well, listen, as we all get up there in age, we don't exactly know who's going to be around us, right? And if we're fortunate, maybe we'll live a very long and healthy life. But we don't know if our loved ones will be there with us as well. And so, in a nutshell, Daniel, this woman basically outlived her family. And she kind of was, if you will, semi-adopted by this other family that was not her blood, that was not her relative, but really just someone in her community. And if I remember the story correctly, she would come over for like a weekly dinner, like a Sunday night dinner. And, really just touched my heart to learn about it from kind of that angle. And when this woman ultimately had passed, she had left a number of her belongings to this family. And they had no idea at all that she had a baseball card collection. Because let's be clear, Daniel, right? If you don't know about vintage cards, if you asked a lot of my friends, more so like their wives, hey, your Uncle Charlie or, my Aunt Betty has some cards, inevitably they just think they're like the cards that are from the 80s and 90s and not worth very much. So that's actually what this family thought when they were initially told that this woman had all these baseball cards. So turns out they weren't just any baseball cards, Daniel. It was an extensive collection of T206s, but it featured the first time ever that my company, Just Collect, was able to buy a T206 Eddie Plank, totally fresh and ungraded. Now, it wasn't high grade, meaning it was poor condition, low grade. However, even all these years later, I still have folks who will come up to me and talk to me about that find. I've had folks run like other videos about it. And that one in particular really got to me, not just for the story, but I realized we had something special when I reached out to David Seidman at the time, was writing for Forbes. And if I'm not mistaken, he loved the story so much, he didn't want me to run the story on my blog first. He wanted to run the story on Forbes.
On Forbes,
and I'm
yeah.
like, you know what, Daniel, I think I got something here.
Yeah.
Not just meaning with this collection, but this whole notion of like, I think people actually care about where these cards are coming from. Meaning, even if you're not buying them, I always call it, I try to be hip, even though my son makes fun of me, right? Like, if you're a good follow on social media, what does that mean? Well, it depends on your category. So for me, I believe that collection helped me to become a good follow, in the sense of, wow, even if you don't collect cards, right? Like, we all read magazines or newspaper articles, or, we read books. Why do we do them? Because we get enjoyment out of reading them, whatever the subject matter is. Well, I realized between that collection being put out, in the Forbes stratosphere, if you will, or the webosphere, as you would like to call it, I also had friends of mine who didn't care about cards at all say, wow, man, that was a really cool collection you found. I'm like, oh, which one are you talking about? So I would say, in a nutshell, that was what I had had some inklings and feelings before, but really that one like cemented my, if you will, path onto, wow, I'm going to try to report on the provenance and the story behind as many of these collections as we acquire as possible.
Yeah, bringing along the videographer is pretty brilliant, honestly. And I know you can't do that for all of them, but I know I've seen videos for some of them that are just, there's a lot of, dealing with people. So all of a sudden now it's a card thing, but now it's also a people thing. It's a history thing. It's a lesson in like, American sort of, popular culture, that kind of thing. So it becomes more of a story than just baseball cards, which is what I love about. So I have a personal interest, and I'll show the cards in a little bit, in the Arizona collection, which was, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago at this point. So tell me a little bit about that one, and then I'll show some cards from it.
I remember that one well, Daniel, because it was one of the very few times in my company's history. Let me rewind. So when I travel versus if someone mails me the cards or they schedule an appointment in my office, it's a little bit different. Meaning when I travel, Dan, you can understand, right? If you travel for business, doesn't matter what you do, you're automatically incurring a cost. You're automatically having a sunk amount of time that you're devoting to this trip. And so I take that very seriously. And so in this case, just like I do with all the other collections I try to travel for, I asked them for a bunch of information up front. And so I don't remember exactly, but I think they told me they had, I don't know, 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig cards. And so, great, we're interested, all from 1933 and 1934 Gaudy. They sent us a bunch of images, Daniel. We build the spreadsheet. I talked to them about what I think the cards are worth. I talked to them about what we would ultimately pay for these cards. I explained to them that I still have to see them in person. So this is, all with, hey, I have to verify them. And so fast forward, we kind of have the precipice of a deal, right? We have the recipe to basically go out there. So I scheduled the trip, and I remember getting off the plane because it was ungodly hot. I mean, all I'm doing is standing in shorts and a t-shirt, waiting to get like my Uber to go to their place. And I'm thinking, like, am I coming down with something? No, it's like 109 degrees.
Arizona.
Yeah. So anyway, I go to their home, and upon walking in, and like I said, if you want to read this whole story, go to blog.justcollect.com. It is one of our most read stories over the last 5 years.
Yeah, I'll link to the blog down
below. Oh, very cool. Thanks, Daniel. So they had every single card laid out on 2 tables, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they were all raw, meaning they were all loose. I knew they were all ungraded, but they were all loose. Like, they were not in top loaders or anything. They were just stacked by number. So thankfully, I was smart enough to at least take a couple images, but I'll be honest, like, I'm even getting the goosebumps now. I was floored, because even if I didn't buy it, this is one thing I'm trying to teach my son, but I think it's a good lesson for life, right? And not just our hobby, but life. You really have to try to enjoy the journey and not always focus on the destination or the outcome. So keep in mind, folks, if I don't buy this collection, I don't make money. But they can also feel that desperation. So I really am, I'm very fortunate and grateful to be in a position in my life where if I don't buy the collection, I'm still going to be okay. But I know that no matter what, I'm going to enjoy it. And so after like that initial shock of like, oh my God, what is going on here? I literally was like the paparazzi. I took out my camera. I started taking photos. So keep in mind, at this point, Daniel, I still don't know exactly what I'm looking at. So the way I start all these kinds of meetings is, hey, gang, great to meet you, so on and so forth. Let's take a look at that initial spreadsheet. So in other words, Daniel, if there's going to be an issue, I'd like to discover it sooner rather than later.
Right, of course.
And so I take out the spreadsheet and I go through, and like I said, I don't know if it was 8 or 9 or 10, but there's a bunch of Lou Gehrig's and Babe Ruths. So keep in mind, in the total collection, there was over 800 Gaudis, which is just absurd. So I do the pictures, I'm walking around, and I asked them to explain to me how the things are organized. So they're like, oh, it's pretty easy. Everything's by numbers, stacks, so on and so forth. Great. So, Daniel, I'm not shy. I'm like, I'm going to get to work. Let's go to number 53, number 144, number 149, and number 181. And Daniel, I swear to God, I thought that they were effing with me, because in the beginning, I think they're like, hey, if you need anything, let me know. We're going to be in the back room. The back room? Like, all right, listen, I appreciate them certainly trusting me, but nonetheless, Daniel, I started to make noises. I don't even know what noises. But it's almost like in the supermarket, like help in aisle 3, like, hey, is everything okay out here? I'm like, guys, listen. I just want to make sure I'm understanding properly what you want me to do. Because I'm going through, and it seems as though you reported initially, 8 or 9 or 10 Lou Gehrig's and Babe Ruths. And if my memory serves me properly, I think they had an aggregate total of 22 Babe Ruths, and I believe 11 Gehrig, something silly. And so whatever it was, I just asked them to make sure that, one, that this is right. 2, are these all the cards? Like, do you want to sell all these? Or maybe you didn't tell me about them because you want to keep them for your family, which, Daniel, of course, I would totally understand. And they said, no, I thought initially, Leighton, when we spoke to you, you just wanted like a sampling of the cards. And I stopped for a minute and I said, wow, my son is very literal. So if you tell him to move 2 steps over in left field, he will take exactly 2 steps. So these folks explained to me, well, we did what you asked. We gave you a sampling of our collection. We liked the numbers. You thought it was worth it to come out. We thought we'd show you the rest. I said, yes, but you have to understand one key thing, and I think you'll appreciate this, Daniel. I would say there's almost never a time where people don't tell me the best cards and the items that they have. In other words, I do show up at collections and they're surprises. But there's not a dozen more Babe Ruth surprises. And so I was just totally floored and flabbergasted. And after that initial shock wore off, I got right down to it. And I remember that deal well because we almost didn't get it in the sense of, listen, we've all been there, Daniel. Even if you're not doing this full time like me, we've all found collections where people think, because they're not in the hobby, that their card is either mint or they've seen a similar example sell for $983,000. Why is my card not worth $983,000? And so, after we got through a lot of that, if you will, question and answer period, it was intense. It was the whole family, and it was like rapid fire questions. I almost felt like I was on the stand. I'm bringing it up, Dan, because I know you're an attorney. But nonetheless, we were able to secure the deal. And what was really funny, at the end of it, it was all in a shoebox, literally just a very nondescript shoebox. I did bring card savers with me, so I believe either all or most of the Hall of Famers I did put in card savers. So the way that we paid them is we went to the bank, we did a wire transfer, and when we were done, I remember asking him, I said, so, do you know where my hotel's at? He's like, oh, yeah, it's that direction. I'm like, great. Do you think you can give me a lift? He's like, yeah, I'm going in that direction. I'm like, oh, okay. So now I have this, 6-figure collection in the shoebox. I guess I'm going to call an Uber because I don't have any transportation. And so I went back to my hotel, and I pretty much lugged it with me everywhere I went for the next couple of days, and then I went back home. But that was a really fun collection.
So I was the beneficiary twice of you getting that collection. And I want to show the first one, which is one of the cornerstones of my collection currently, which is the 1934 Jimmy Fox card number 1 in a SGC 2 holder, which I think is a little conservative. I think this could have been a 3. But you and I did actually transpire and do the deal on this in the Philly show, literally at the Philly show. I know I traded a 1951 Ted Williams and a little bit of cash. And what I do recall, and this is something that I give you, unending kudos for, is we sat together, looked at the VCP prices, literally went through it, figured it out, and did a fair deal, which to me, I also, have had you assess a couple of collection sets, whatever, of mine. Same thing, spreadsheet, fair pricing, all that kind of stuff, which I really appreciate. So, when I bring on dealers, and I've had people reach out who were dealers to say, they wanted to be on the show, but you're the first dealer that's ever been on my show.
Oh, I didn't know that, Daniel. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So, very much appreciate that. So this, I did a Jimmy Fox show a couple of months ago with our friend Mark Hoyle. And of course, he had a much larger collection of Jimmy Fox than I do. He's the guy with the biggest Red Sox collection in the world. And then the other one I got, which was part of, I guess you were able to put together a complete set and then broke it on Vintage Breaks. And one of the cards that I landed on was this absolutely gorgeous Paul Wainer. I actually had this card in a PSA 3. And when I took this and compared the two of them, it wasn't even close. This one was so much nicer. I mean, not just the centering and the bright colors and the registration, but yeah, everything was great about it. I think that was like an old label 3, but this,
I know this is self-serving, Daniel, and I know that you like the cards, but I do really appreciate and love the fact that you're similar to me in that where some of your cards have come from. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're worth more, but I know, speaking of first, so my son Crosby, when we recently traveled, he went on his first ever deal with me. He did. He sat there, he wasn't involved in it, but he sat there.
Yep.
And we bought some T206s, which maybe we'll talk about today or in the future. And I'm giving him a John McGraw. It's lower grade. It's not worth a ton of money. But that John McGraw to me, and I think to my son, I hope, is priceless because it's a memory. Of course, it's a card and it has some intrinsic value.
Absolutely.
But it really is worth a lot more than that. And I really do think that our hobby as a whole, whether it be it's a game used jersey, whether it be it's a card, because remember, memorabilia, Daniel, people care a lot more about where it's come from. Cards, it's still a little bit like, I don't really care where it came from. I just want a nice card. I think you're starting to see more folks like you and myself actually care where the cards have come from.
Well, the thing about Wainer, obviously you want a guy who's, Hall of Famer, top 5 Pirate of all time, that kind of thing. But what's interesting to me, what connects it to me family-wise, is that I did a show, I don't know, early on in the channel. My grandfather went to the 1942 spring training down in Florida and took about 10 photographs of a variety of different teams. And one of those photographs was an older, end of his career, Paul Wainer playing for the Boston Bees. They were called the Bees for a few years. So that I've always known who Paul Wainer was because I knew my grandfather's photographs from when I was a little kid. So that to me connects that up, obviously. And of course, Jimmy Fox he's a monster. I mean, he's literally a monster in the hobby and physically. So what I'm really happy about, and the cool thing about this particular show, is that you're going to debut discussions of 2 different recent collections.
Yes.
And I guess the Nebraska and the Boston.
Yes.
Whichever you want to talk about first.
Sure, we'll start with Nebraska because it was a little bit larger.
Okay.
So a gentleman and his family, so it was really his sister's son that did the research, found me over the internet, and then I guess this gentleman who owns the collection had a little bit of a connection to Leland's and had known Josh Evans. And so I'm pretty sure, on my blog or somewhere on my site, I'm proud to have worked for Leland's. It's a great company. I learned a lot. I cut my teeth on vintage with them. And so I think that there was a little bit of comfortability kind of knowing where I came from and my background. That being said, when they reached out, Daniel, like many folks who reach out, they wanted me to get on a plane right away. And that's just not how I operate. And I can tell you, I'm sure I've lost deals for that. But I believe that, forget about money and everything else, we can't buy back our time. And so my 9-year-old, who almost looks like a 19-year-old, he's growing pretty quick back there, my time with him is priceless.
Right.
So when I travel, I really try to have a very high batting average, as soon as I'm willing to get on a plane or get in the car. And so in a nutshell, Daniel, we probably corresponded for like a solid month or 2. Keep in mind, the gentleman's name is Uncle Curtis. He's from Fremont, Nebraska. And the reason why it took so long is, number one, his collection's massive, and I know you'll appreciate this. So he's old school. So he had very little graded, which on the one hand is exciting, but on the other hand, just to give you an idea, I flew out on a Monday morning, first flight, call it 6:30 a.m. from LaGuardia, no direct flights from Newark to Omaha, and then an hour from there to Fremont. I arrive there, I get my rental car, I go right to his place. I don't leave there until Wednesday, say the flight's at 6 o'clock. Daniel, I work the entire time.
Wow.
It's just myself. I wish I had a videographer, but it was not practical to bring them to Fremont, Nebraska. And so all I did for about 17, 18 hours a day was catalog and then ultimately go back to my hotel, do the spreadsheets, figure out what the items were worth, figure out what I think everything was worth, and then ultimately tell them what I could pay. But keep in mind, the way that I'm describing it, it's an incredible amount of work. I had over 30 pages of notes.
Wow.
And so someone, literally, Uncle Curtis, sat across from me Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, just firing. Leighton, what's next? What do you want to see next? I don't know. What do you got? You got a Coca-Cola here? I got to stay awake. It was intense. It was a lot of fun. And I want to make sure I point this out. We all know a lot about cards, but we all still don't know everything, okay? And the reason why this particular collection was very special to me, he had so much pride in ownership and in the work he did to put it together. I enjoyed being there, and I kind of felt like I was a little bit in school. Not that I didn't know about the cards, but I was explaining to some of the guys in the office earlier this week. For example, he collected a lot of Babe Ruth Quaker Oats premiums, like ball caps, girls' bracelets, books, flip books. He was so ahead of his time that he would go and, let's say, read the Sunday newspapers and then take out the comic section where there was a lot of advertisements. And he was saved for many years and then started to ultimately collect all these different sports advertisements that would show Babe Ruth premiums, Dizzy Dean premiums, all different sorts of things that you could send away for through the mail, but were sometimes nondescript when you would get them back. So Daniel, the only way you would actually know what they were was by having this advertisement from like a 1936 newspaper.
How old is he?
How old is the gentleman?
Yeah.
Uncle Curtis is in his late 70s.
Okay.
So he didn't necessarily go in the 1930s and read the newspapers. Right. What I'm saying is he started to collect them very early on. And to give you an idea of, his collecting journey, he went to the St. Louis National. And I was explaining to him, I felt pretty good about my national record because I've been to the last 29 in a row, starting with Atlanta or Chicago, like in the late 90s. I wasn't even aware of the St. Louis National, meaning that national happened before I even started going to them. So he was explaining to me that when he would go to the national, guys like Josh Evans, Bill Mastro, they would love for him to come because he always had some really interesting stuff. And as the way I just mentioned, he could tell you undoubtedly what it was and where it came from. And so I really felt it was an enlightening experience because it's not often, I might get some life lessons traveling the road, and that's of course wonderful. But I was literally in school for let's say an hour or two a day. And I'm just, it's not that hard to use the internet to do research. So if I wasn't sure of something, I tried to figure it out. And if I didn't know, I would tell them. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, after 3 days, I spent $77,000 with him. And what's really cool is there isn't one area of the collection where I'm like, oh, he had a $30,000 such and such. To give you an idea, I probably bought 550 pounds of material. And I only know that because I took back with me 100 pounds, 70 in the check suitcase, 30 on the carry-on. And then there was 11 additional boxes that weighed about 450 pounds. And so in the end, this is the collection in a nutshell. Tito 06s, hundreds of B18 blankets, bazooka panels, post-serial complete sets, Harton statues, Babe Ruth premiums. The list goes on, and I'll buy 64 Topps that was his favorite set. High grade 64 Topps baseball set, 55 Topps All-American set, Dixie lids. I mean, the list goes on and on. It was fascinating.
Dixie lids from the 30s?
Yes.
You know, like this guy?
Jimmy Fox, yep. He didn't have a Fox.
He didn't have. Well, I'm gonna have to sell it to him now. So
it was a lot of fun.
Do we have any cards from this amazing collection to show?
I do. Unfortunately, they're in my office. So those are the cards that I don't have at home, but I do have cards from the Boston collection. And I just want to be clear with your audience, Daniel, we're going to do a full video on the Nebraska collection on my YouTube channel, Just Collect. And then a full written story will be on our blog at blog.justcollect.com. And if you follow me on IG, Leighton_Sheldon, I'll start showing off some of that stuff.
It'll all be in the description. Yep.
Yeah, I'm trying. Oh, this is a couple of the really cool items, the higher end items. Have you even ever heard of a Philly cigar Mickey Mantle? Do you know what that is?
It sounds familiar, but what are we talking about specifically?
It's a photo premium. So in other words, the Philly Cigar Company had a deal where you could send in some coupons and money. You would get a Mickey Mantle baseball glove and a Mickey Mantle, call it like an 8x10 photo premium. PSA grades them. They're very hard to find in high grade. And
how big are they?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
How big are they? They're like
about 8x10.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was really cool. I think he had an R312 Joe DiMaggio, which many consider to be like his rookie.
Right.
Just beautiful color, a great look to it. He had just like, I would say, a lot of interesting knickknacks, exhibits, Goudies, but he didn't have a Babe Ruth Goudie. He didn't have a Lou Gehrig Goudie. He doesn't have a 52 Bowman or 51 Bowman Mickey Mantle or 52 Topps Mickey Mantle. But what he didn't have in like the super high end cards, he just had he had a Babe Ruth Cavalcade of Sport Champions, graded PSA 4. Just really interesting things that you don't see every day. And what was super cool throughout the collection, like that Philly Cigar Mickey Mantle. So he didn't just have the Philly Cigar Mantle Premium. He has the letter that came back with the glove and the photo.
Yep.
He was just really into that, type of collecting.
And that's the kind of stuff that is priceless these days because, people like myself and other collectors, not only on YouTube, but everywhere else, are always trying to find out information behind how these oddball cards, this is the new controversy this week is people calling cards oddballs. But anyway, so you a lot of times don't know the history of, you mail away this, you do that, but this guy with the actual advertisements is absolutely priceless in terms of the knowledge and the background of those cards. So Boston collection. I was in Boston 2 weeks ago. I didn't see
we almost crossed paths.
Actually, no, I saw the greatest collection. I saw Mark Hoyle's collection, but I wasn't buying it because he ain't selling it. But what the collection that you bought? Where in Boston? And let's go through it.
Sure, it was actually just outside Boston. I think it was Rockland, Massachusetts. And I'll tell you the quick story because I know you got to run in about 10 minutes or so. And so this gentleman, it was one of those situations where, even though it's a great collection, we weren't going to really travel for it on its own. And he wasn't comfortable shipping it. He made it very clear to us. But we use Salesforce to manage our information and our leads. So, for example, Daniel, if I'm going out of town to Arizona, if I'm going to Boston, even if it's for personal reasons, I will often look up using Salesforce, hey, do I have any action? Do I have any leads in that area? Maybe someone like Kevin who wants me to see the cards in person, isn't willing to ship, may or may not sell, so we can't travel for it. But if you're in the neighborhood, it's worth it to drop by. And so that's what happened here. I was taking my son to Maine on our summer vacation together, and we both had never been. And I just kind of on a whim looked up, like Boston and Maine and a couple other areas. And so John Paul Maris, our vice president, had been dealing with Kevin. And Kevin had inherited a collection of cards from his grandfather, ironically, when he was about my son's age, about 9. And one of the most interesting parts of the collection, so a few hundred T206s, a bunch of Hall of Famers, which I do have some of them here, so I can show them off. What was really interesting is two things. One, you could tell from his face, he believes that there were more cards in the collection. He said he doesn't know if there was a Honus, but he definitely knows there was hundreds of other cards. He doesn't know if he was even given them or if they were given to someone else in his family, but they're just gone. Okay.
Yeah.
And number two, but I made him feel better by explaining to him, I said, you understand, my dad's 50s collection, which probably wasn't anything compared to what he had, meaning Kevin, they're just all gone, you know, and he probably even threw them out himself because my dad was that kind of guy. So, excuse me. The second thing that was really interesting about the collection is when, excuse me, when he was, I think like a teenager, early 20s, he explained to me that he was in a desperate situation of sorts. And we've all been there at some point in our life. You might be like, wait, what do you mean? Well, he was dating a woman. And back then, your car was like, he said to me, was everything. And I knew exactly what he meant. Meanwhile, my son has his headphones on, thank goodness, like earmuffs, you know, not for you, Cross. So he explains to me that, late, my engine died. And the way he said it to me, he's like, I felt like I died. I'm like, I get it. I get it. So tell me the story. So he said, you know, I needed money to fix my car badly. You know, I hear you. So he said he took this very collection and the cards were in a tin that his grandfather gave him when he was 9. He still had the cards in that same tin. We just mailed it back to him because we did all the photography in our office, etc. He wanted to have like a piece of his grandfather. And we actually sent him a T206 of Lord from Boston. So he kind of would have like a little display piece with the 10. So anyway, you know, we're going through the cards, and he's explained to me that he brought this collection around when he was, you know, 50, 60 years ago, whatever it is. And a local collector / dealer had offered him $700. And he said he could taste the money because he wanted it so bad to fix his car. He doesn't know how or why he said no, because he doesn't remember falling into money, but he just couldn't do that to his grandfather, he said at the time. And he's had the cards ever since. So fast forward.
Not the girl, though.
I don't.
He didn't get the girl, though.
Well, he didn't make mention of it. And his wife wasn't there. I don't think his wife was that woman. You know, but I didn't ask. And he wasn't, you know, looking to get into it, so I didn't want to stir the pot. You know what I mean? Anyway, what was really interesting and kind of made me cringe, he had a number of the T206s. 2 of them were in a top load.
Together.
You heard me, 2 of them, he would fit into like, obviously it wasn't like that when they were gifted to him. He didn't know how to take care of them. So he took a top load, which I don't really have at home, but like here's a card saver. And instead of putting them in the top, he put them in the side. So like my cuticles were wrecked. I was going in and trying to take out cards from the side because I wanted to evaluate them. Now, almost all of them were all low grade, but there were some beauties in there. And ultimately, when we looked at the cards and I gave him the evaluation, he wasn't ready to sell. And I was a little bit bummed, but John told me that he may not. Listen, you know, I understood that. I explained to him that we would be in the Boston area for a couple days, but on Thursday morning, Crosby and I are taking off for Maine. And so he did ask, hey, are you comfortable? And I really appreciate about this. Excuse me. I really appreciate this about people, Daniel, especially not in our hobby. They're so respectful of getting a free evaluation. He said, hey, am I allowed to have this spreadsheet? I said, well, you can't have this one, but I can email it to you. He said, you would do that? And we talked about it a few minutes ago. I find that transparency is just what works for me.
Yep.
Everyone doesn't always agree with my evaluation. They don't always agree with my offer, but they agree with the process. So he gets the email Tuesday night. Wednesday, crickets. I'm just thinking we're not getting the collection. And on a whim, Thursday morning, like 8:30 a.m., you know, my son's still sleeping. I get on the phone with J5, as he's affectionately known as. He's been with me for almost 16, 17 years. I said, do me a favor. Maybe Kevin didn't read the email. or he has some questions and he was embarrassed to ask. I don't know. But one of the things that made me think that we had a chance to do a deal. So when I made him the offer, he said, you know, Leighton, I'm going to think about it. This is on that Tuesday. I have a number in mind. And I didn't really want to press him because I could tell he wanted to digest the information. And, you know, you don't want to bid against yourself, Dan. You understand that. So he ultimately talks to John on that Thursday morning. And I asked him in the email, not only did he have any questions when I gave him the evaluation, but I said, just out of curiosity, like, what was your number, if you're comfortable saying? So long story short, I wanted to get the collection and also wanted to get it, not just to maybe make a few shekels, but also it was my son's first collection. And there was definitely some emotional component to me that wanted to try to close it if I could. And so I don't exactly know what we offered. It was very close to the $15,000 that we ultimately settled for. But him and John reached a deal on the phone for $15,000. And this I so very much appreciated. He said, I'll tell you what, you tell Leighton, I don't want to hold them up. I'm going to come down to the hotel and deliver them. So that way him and I can get ready. Nice. And then we had a wonderful time doing it. He didn't want to do an interview. I understand that. He's not necessarily a YouTube guy. But I'll tell you what, when I asked him to take photos with my son, because it would mean something to me, he was like a big ham. My son and I both were calling him Uncle Kevin. And it felt a little bit weird. He's like, you can call your Uncle Kevin anytime you're back in Boston. And so to me, and by the way, my son asked me, like, he doesn't know the money, but he did ask me for a few days. He said, Daddy, are you going to buy that collection? I said, I don't know. So we were so happy when we bought it. Let me show you just a couple of the highlights. There was a couple Ty Cobbs, red portrait, which is actually pretty nice, all things considered. Yeah. The Baton was low grade. All 3 Cy Youngs.
Oh, nice.
Softball Hall of Famers, which is really cool. There is another Mathewson. I think I might have already sent it to SGC. I don't remember. This is one of my favorite cards in the set, the Nap.
Yep. I just got that card.
Tris Speaker, I thought if he was going to keep one, I told him he could keep it. You know, I would deduct it from the deal. He said, nope, I don't need the money to fix the car anymore. I joked. So this was the rarity. There was one rare card. There was a Kid Elberfeld Washington portrait, which, as you know, Daniel, is not easy to get.
Yep.
Now, it doesn't have a rare back. But speaking of rare backs, there's no rare backs in the collection. But I'll finish up with this one, even though there's, as you can see, a bunch of Hall of Famers. So I thought this was really cool. This is Mordecai Three Finger Brown.
Yep.
Not an easy card to set, but this is so cool. It doesn't just have one factory and an overprint, but it actually has 2 factories.
Oh, nice.
And that is very unusual on a T206, especially a Hall of Famer. So you can see, Daniel, it is factory 25 and factory 42. One above the overprint and one below.
Nice.
Pretty cool.
And that's actually in pretty nice condition. That
it is. Round. Everything was lowish grade, but some of the cards will get a VG.
What do you think about the red Cobb?
Probably a 2. Probably a 2.
Still.
Yeah, I mean, we'll take it. Believe me. And we got the John McGraw, which I don't know if I have here. Oh no, here it is. This is the card I'm giving my son.
Yep, I have that card.
And so it's kind of cool because Kevin got a Boston player, my son got a New York player, and you know the company will make a couple bucks, and we had a lot of fun. We really did.
Well, that's that's kind of the dream. I mean, I know it's work. No question about it. You know, the work involved in going through and cataloging the cards and creating the spreadsheet and all that. It's a lot of work, and it's got to be drudgery. And sometimes, I'm not crazy about having to go through all my cards, but I'm not sitting there like, but taking a trip to another town. I know you went to, you've been to Florida, you've been to Washington State, right? I know you've been all over the place, and that's the cool thing is you get to travel, but also you get to meet people and hear stories. And, it's just, I admire not only your transparency, but your ability to kind of absorb these, important parts of American culture that no one would really ever know. Right.
And not just American culture, but people.
Yeah.
So without getting into it, Uncle Curtis's sister's son, Jeff, we all have stuff going on in our life. He's got some stuff going on. We talked a bunch. We bonded over a few days. He might start writing some blogs for us. and he's going to start by sitting with his Uncle Curtis and interviewing him so we can
Oh,
share
nice.
some of this unbelievable information, which I had the privilege to hear over a few days. I'd love to share it on our blog with the Collecting Hobby.
Awesome.
So
So
that's
you
the
got,
good stuff.
yeah, that's the good stuff. Um, Again, my friend, as you know, we've become friends and hung out socially and all that other stuff. But I am a huge fan, obviously, and not just your collection stories, but the businesses, the people that work for you. I'm friends with John, obviously. I'm friends with Chris. Chris and I text all the time, so it's been important for me to connect, at least in the hobby, and just being able to talk to you about different things. We were talking about a Call Yastrzemski rookie card, and those kinds of things. And I wanted to let you know that I bought one.
Oh, I want you to show me a picture of it. I want to see.
It's on my
When you
phone.
get it in. When you get it in.
When I get it in. When I get it in, it'll be on the channel, because I actually just bought that Naplahoy portrait in a low grade. So I got that, and I got a 52 Bowman mantle that just came in, and I got Caramella Deport. Oh my God, what's Caramella Deport?
Yes, it's
Yeah,
hard to say.
of Adolfo Luque that I just bought. So I got 4 pretty cool things to talk about. But I really appreciate you coming on, taking your time. I know you got your son today, and I hope you guys have a great day. And obviously, talk to you soon. But viewers, the Leighton Show this is probably going to be broadcast on Wednesday, and then I'm going to come back on next Saturday with another super collector that I'm interviewing right after we're done. So anyway, Leighton, viewers, thank you for tuning in. Leighton, thank you so much for your time and all of your stories, and hopefully we can have you on again with another couple of collections to talk about. What do you think?
Daniel, I'm very grateful for you having me, and I appreciate our friendship very much, and I'll come back anytime.
Awesome. All right. Take care.